dream on.
What is up everyone, Mark here. Welcome back to my channel, welcome if you're new. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 biggest crimes of Eurovision 2023. Now these are basically any events or things that happened in the contest that I found very surprising and not so much in a good way. I think this was a great edition of the contest, but there were a couple things that we could definitely consider crimes. Of course, these are not actual crimes. EBU, please do not come for me. Let's start off with my number 10 spot, which is Katya getting 376 televote points and still finishing second. This was a shock to me. If you don't know, Katya got the second highest amount of televote points that any entry has gotten besides Cluj Orchestra last year. The only entry to get as many televote points was Salvador Sobral in 2017, which was, as we know, one of the biggest Eurovision successes. He did super well both with the juries and the televoters and got over 700 points. So with all that said, Katya had one of the biggest televote landslides and still did not win. Now we'll talk more about Lorene's points a bit later because, as we know, she got a large amount of jury votes, so much that it was almost impossible for Katya to get as many overall points, but again, we will talk about that later. It was just shocking that an entry that got so many televote points could still not win, and I think that's a big part of why so many people were upset about Katya coming second. It wasn't just that Lorene got so many points, it was that Katya was the people's winner. A large percentage of televoters voted for Katya. I mean, he was the undisputed landslide winner of the televote, and I will say too, he got more points overall than Måneskin did. It's not like he didn't do well with the juries either. He still did okay with the juries. He got 4th place in the jury vote, and yet that plus the great televote score was not enough for him to win. I mean, look at 2021, right? Måneskin won with a total of 525 points, which is actually less, 1 point less, than Katya's overall score at 526. And Lorene, who got over 100 less televote points than Katya, surpassed him overall by almost 60 points. That math was pretty shocking to me. In my opinion, Katya definitely deserved to win. He was the people's winner, especially considering that Lorene had already won, and him coming second really just was one of the most shocking, and for a lot of people, one of the most disappointing parts of this competition. So with that said, let's move on to our next crime, which is, simply put, France flopping. Now, I don't want to call France a total flop because I did like the performance. What I really mean is that Lazara did not get the result that we expected nor wanted for France. Évidemment was consistently in my top 10, and I really did expect it to do very well. I mean, this was gearing up to be France's best result since Voila, which was only 2 years ago, but still it was poised to be at least a top 10 finish, maybe even a top 5 finish. She was doing so well in the odds. All the performances leading up to Eurovision made it seem like France was going to do incredibly well, if not potentially even win. Unfortunately, as we know, that's not what happened. Seeing her in the grand final, I was actually mostly impressed. I actually did like her staging. I had some concerns going in about the dress and if she would be able to move on that kind of podium she was on, but for me, the staging really had no issues. It was very unique, very eye-catching for sure. When it comes to her vocals, that's where we get into some of the iffy territory. I found her vocals to be mostly good. I wasn't really a big fan of that final high note though. I thought it sounded a bit too sharp, but aside from that, overall, I thought this was good. Also, a really good song. I thought this was going to resonate with a lot of people, and I was also hoping that at least some people would overlook the kind of iffy notes at the end. However, it doesn't seem like that was the case because Lazara didn't do that great in either the jury vote or the televote, which was honestly shocking, and I really think she deserved better. I mean, yes, there were some off moments in her vocals, but hey, Lazara is amazing. She's a great artist. She did give us great vocals for the most part, and also had some of the most eye-catching staging we got all year. I really think one of the big factors besides the high note was actually the running order. I mean, a lot of the songs that went earlier did not do that great, so that could be part of it, especially because you had Lorene and Katya later on, but still, I think this song deserved better and should have gotten, in my opinion, at the very least a top 15 result. So with that said, let's move on to Romania's staging. Now, I was actually a pretty big fan of the song DGT. When I first saw DGT performed live, that was actually when Theodore was performing by himself. I believe it was during a preview ahead of the actual national final for Romania. So it had very different staging from what we actually got in the final and also in ESC. The staging for that performance was very simple. It was actually just Theodore on stage by himself, with the only effects being some lighting and some effects on the floor, which you can see here. It really was very simple, very toned down, nothing too crazy or over the top. And Theodore was also dressed quite well. He had a nice suit on, it looked very classy, the staging looked great, the vocals were great. I thought this was going to do well. I thought it was going to look good in the national final. I had no worries. And as we know, this did actually win the national final, but not without some changes to the staging. And in my opinion, the staging that they gave us in the national final was a bit of a mess, honestly. The outfits, in my opinion, looked horrible, and the dancers were just so distracting. I really preferred it when it was just Theodore on stage by himself, but hey, regardless, he still won the national final and was on his way to Eurovision. In Eaea, I was hoping they would give us some very toned-down staging, nothing like they gave us in the national final, and to a degree that was the case. Theodore had a somewhat better outfit, and the staging was a lot more simple. There were no distracting dancers, at least until the end, and the whole thing looked okay, but it still paled in comparison to what we got in that first preview, and it just looked weird overall. There's a reason this got 0 points in the televote, and I really think it was the staging. I've read online that Theodore actually got no support from the broadcaster, and the dancer was actually one of his friends who just had to come on stage and help him out. That's what I heard, and if it's true, it makes sense because the staging was very all over the place and looked pretty amateur. Theodore is a great artist, this is a really good song, and he just deserved so much better. So with that said, let's move on to my next spot, which is Portugal's staging, or lack thereof. Like évidemment, I Coração was consistently in my top 10 ahead of the actual show, and I really was hoping to see this do well. Mimicat had a fantastic performance in Festival de Canção, with great staging, great vocals, great outfits, great everything. I'm not sure what happened, but for whatever reason, the staging we got in Liverpool was nothing like it. There was no couch, no props, no real use of the LEDs. The stage just looked very dark and bland. And Mimicat, yeah, she had a nice costume, but it just didn't look quite as interesting as the costume she had in Festival de Canção. I was very disappointed with the staging overall because it just didn't look at all like what I or a lot of other people were really expecting from this entry. I was hoping for some great staging that was as good if not better than what we got in Festival de Canção. I mean, if they had the budget for that in the national final, no doubt they would have the budget for it in Eurovision, right? I read a lot of comments saying that the Portuguese delegation did not actually give Mimicat that many funds, or at least the budget, to give us that same kind of staging, which is confusing to me. I mean, whether or not that is true, I think it is strange that Portugal would want to send an entry with this much potential and not give it the staging it deserves. I'm very happy she qualified, but she deserved way better than the spot she got. She deserved, in my opinion, at least top 15. With better staging, she could have made top 10. With better staging, honestly, she probably would have made top 10. But because she did not have good staging and also went second, she did not even make the top 20. And that is so disappointing to me. This was one of my favorite entries, one of the best in my opinion that Portugal has sent, but unfortunately did not have the support, the budget, the staging it deserved to give us a great result. And that, I think, is a true and utter crime. This was amazing, Mimicat was amazing, and this deserved so much better than what we got. So that said, let's move on to my next spot, my next Eurovision crime, and that is Lord of the Lost coming last. Now, I was actually a big fan of Lord of the Lost. I thought they were amazing. I'm a big fan of rock and heavy metal, so it was very great to see that in Eurovision. Watching them in the German national final, it was clear that there were much worse songs Germany could have sent. Lord of the Lost was, in my opinion, the best of the bunch by far, and just the most entertaining. And in Eurovision, I didn't see any problem with their song, with their staging, anything. If anything, it was a lot more exciting and visually captivating than what they gave us in the German national final. So I was very surprised that they still came last. As we know, Germany was last year as well, and they had a much worse song, so I really thought Lord of the Lost would have done a lot better. Somehow they didn't. I'm not really sure why. I really don't understand it because rock entries tend to do pretty well. Yeah, if someone could explain that in the comments, please do, because I thought this was good. It wasn't in my top 10, yeah, but definitely was not in my bottom 10 either. I really am not sure why they got such a low result, but hey, it is what it is. In my opinion, there were other entries that could have gone in the last place. I mean, it was a strong year, but just for me personally, it's hard to wrap my head around how Germany got last place again, and I hope that that is not the case next year because Germany is clearly trying to step it up. I mean, Lord of the Lost was great, and I can only hope the next year's entry is just as good, if not better, and gets the love it deserves from Eaea. So with that said, let's move on to my next spot, which is the jury playing it safe with Loreen. I'm not one of those people who thinks that Loreen is horrible or bad or anything like that. I do listen to Tattoo every now and then. I think it is very catchy and quite a good song. I think Loreen is a very talented artist. She was, in 2012, my winner. Euphoria is still one of the most iconic Eurovision songs of all time, and Tattoo, while I don't like it as much as Euphoria, is pretty close in terms of songs that I really enjoy from Eurovision. However, I don't think her performance was quite as good as I think the juries thought it was, or at least honest, I don't think it should have gotten as many points as it did. For me, I think there were a lot of other songs that definitely should have gotten those jury points. Songs that, in my opinion, kind of were a lot more in line with what juries usually vote for, like Blanca Paloma's Eaea, or even songs like Albina, I felt like would have been better picks for the jury, or at least deserved a bit more jury points. Whereas Tattoo, I mean, yeah, it's good, but 340 jury points is a bit excessive in my opinion for a song like that. It made it so that no other song realistically could have won unless it got an absurd amount of televote points, and Katya won the televote in a landslide, got over 100 more televote points than Loreen, and still only came second and lost by over 50 points. And I can see as well why a lot of people are quite suspicious about these jury voting patterns, because it's a bit surprising that in a year with other strong ballads and a lot of culturally significant songs, that almost all the juries decided to give a lot of points, and especially a lot of 12 points, to Loreen. I feel like in a lot of ways the juries were just playing it safe, kind of thinking, okay, like let's vote for the thing that just is the most, I guess, mainstream, or seems the most likely to win. And I'm not sure what their thought process was, I'm just speculating, but it really did feel like they were playing it safe, kind of voting for what they thought the public would like, or just what they thought would be the most radio friendly, and not really voting the way they usually do. The jury winner last year was Spaceman, and that is the kind of song that, yeah, I get it. I totally understand why that won the jury vote, and honestly, if I was a jury member, yeah, I would have voted for that too. But this year, I like Tattoo, I love Loreen, but just really did not see why it deserved that many jury points. But that's really all I have to say on that front. I really think Katya would have deserved to win. He was the people's winner, but the juries spoke, and the juries chose the winner this year, so hey, what are we gonna do, right? On that same note, let's move on to the next Eurovision crime, and that is Poland doing better than Slovenia and Serbia, as well as a couple others. Now, one of the many shocking occurrences of the 2023 national final season was beating Yan in the Polish national final. Yeah, that was a big shock to everyone, and there was a lot of buzz about it in the Eurovision fandom. A lot of people were saying how Blanca should have been disqualified, and how Yan clearly should have been the winner of that selection. And so my expectations for Blanca going into ESC were naturally quite low. I did not see her doing very well. I didn't see her getting above last place. To be honest, I did not even think she would qualify. So imagine my shock when she not only qualified, but ended up doing better than a lot of fan favorites. She did better than Mimi Cat, she did better than Joker Out, she did better than Albina, and while I will admit that there were some elements that made it a lot better, like the dance break and a bit of the staging, I was still genuinely in shock that she did better than some of these other great entries. I mean, Slovenia, for instance, right? Carpe Diem was one of my favorite songs of this entire season, and to see it not even reach the top 20 was tragic. In my opinion, Solo was a strong contender for the last place. If I recall, it was actually my last place in the contest, and that's because I just didn't find it to be that original. I found the song to be a bit bland, and the staging, while okay, just reminded me too much of Do It For Your Lover from 2017. And of course, the dance break was pretty good, but I still found it very derivative of other songs that came before, like Fuego, like Slow-Mo last year, and just didn't really captivate me in any way, whereas songs like Ai Coração and Sama Mi Spava, and especially Carpe Diem, really did. So it just goes to show how confusing, or at least just surprising these results were, that a song like Solo performed significantly better than a lot of this year's fan favorites. So with that said, let's move on to my next spot, which is Latvia Not Qualifying. In my opinion, Sudden Lights gave one of the most captivating, emotional, and just perfect performances of the first semifinal. Semifinal 1 was incredibly strong. I'll admit they had some steep competition, but Eaea stood out as one of the only songs that was a lot more subtle, more emotional, and just more intimate. And I think that was actually part of why it did not qualify. If the jury was involved in picking semifinalists, I do think Eaea would have qualified, because juries do tend to go for this kind of music, but because it was televote only, a lot of the songs that were a lot more flashy and just instantly caught your attention were pretty much the songs that qualified. For me, Eaea was one of the few songs that I really connected with, and I will admit I did vote for them, I did chip in some points, and unfortunately that was not enough to get them to qualify. I really think they were a great band and really deserved to qualify, and it really is a shame that they did not make it to the final, because I really think they could have done well. They were actually in my top 10 ahead of the show, and they were in a lot of other people's top 10s, or at least higher up in their lists, and they were also a bit of a fan favorite. So very surprising, very disheartening, but hey, what happened happened, but for me that was just one of the biggest crimes of this season. So with that said, let's move on to our next crime, which is Traditional songs being robbed in the televote. I'm a person who loves when countries send songs in their native languages and also incorporate a lot of cultural elements. I think those are things that make the songs unique, really make them authentic to the countries they're coming from. Now, this year only had a couple entries that were like this, but I thought they were excellent, and the results they got just did not really speak, I felt, to how great these songs were. And as you might know, one of those that I liked the most was Blanca Paloma's Eaea. Now, this was an iconic entry with some great vocals, great staging, and what I like about the song is that it is in this very distinct flamenco style, which we don't really see that often in Eurovision, which was something that I wasn't really introduced to before hearing this song. So it was bringing something different, something very traditional, very culturally unique. However, Blanca only ended up getting 5 televote points. Also, songs like I Coração by Mimicat did not do so great in the televote. We saw this last year as well, especially with France. So I really hope these results do not discourage countries from sending more traditional entries. I really want to see more songs like Eaea, like I Coração. Now, again, this year did not have many songs that were that traditional, but I hope that will change next year. I hope these results will not discourage countries like they might have in the past. So we shall see what happens, but with that said, let's move on to the next Eurovision crime, and that is Yan losing to Blanca. One of my favorite entries from the national final season was Yan with the song Gladiator. The song is catchy, it's different, it's interesting. Not only did it sound amazing in the studio, but Yan did a fantastic job bringing this to life on stage. Yes, some of his vocals were a bit shaky, but hey, he still gave a very powerful and exciting performance. One that, in my opinion, was the absolute best of the night. The only other song that I really liked from that national final was Elena's song, which I'm not sure I can say on YouTube, but I thought it was very fun. I thought she had a great song. The performance, not so much. Really, it was just those two that I liked that much. The song Solo by Blanca wasn't even on my radar until it actually won, somehow. So imagine my shock when I found out that Yan not only did not win, but had been surpassed by an entry that I found super dated and very underwhelming. This was before the Beba memes, which I think definitely gave Poland a lot of momentum going into ESC, but for me, Blanca and the song Solo and her performance just didn't do anything for me, so I was very surprised. I was thinking to myself, how did this even win? How did this go to Eurovision instead of Yan? Come to find out that, allegedly, there was some finagling behind the scenes, some stuff going on that made it so that the only person who was going to win was always Blanca from the very beginning. I don't know if that's 100% true. This is just what people say. I mean, I have my opinion on what actually happened, but I don't want anyone to come for me, let alone a Polish broadcaster, so I will say, allegedly, stuff happened behind the scenes. Regardless, I think Yan 100% deserved to win. I think he was the indisputed televote winner of that competition. I think I actually saw the results. Yan was the televote winner. In my opinion, he was just the best by far that night, and I still listened to that song a lot. If it went to ESC, it would have easily been in my top 10. Loved the song, loved his performance. I mean, everything about this was great, and it really was just such a disappointment that Yan did not get to go to Eurovision this year. Hopefully he will get a chance next year or later. I really think he's got so much talent and could do so well if he actually went. I really think he would have done much better than Blanca. So that is really it for me. These are my top 10 crimes of the Eurovision season this year. Let me know if you agree, disagree down below. I really do want to hear what you have to say. If there's anything I left out, please let me know. I really want to hear about some of your top crimes for Eurovision this year. It would be very fun to start a discussion about this because I'm sure everyone has very different opinions. So whether or not you agree or disagree with my list, please sound off down below. And with that said, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help me out and helps the channel grow, and it brings us one step closer to 3,000 subscribers. With all that, thank you all once again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time. Peace.